Hey, it's Bran. Today we're sculpting Bulma from Dragon Ball and using Andrew Cockroach's sketch for concept and reference. Since Andrew's drawing is already almost a front view of a turnaround, I'll just use his image for the anatomy reference instead of sketching out a base myself. So after I get the correct scale using rigify human rig, I start blocking out Bulma with subdivided cubes. You can use any primitives you want, like UV spheres or cylinders, but subdivided cubes works best for me since I can get the shapes I want relatively quicker, since I'm only having to deal with like 8 verts per cube and only a few more points if I add loop cuts. On the other hand, if I were using UV spheres, I'd probably be shaping them in sculpt mode instead of edit mode, and yeah, for a video that's labeled as a sculpt vid, you'd think that's what I'd be into, but at least for blocking out, I'm quicker in edit mode. After blocking out the body, I move on to the face. I'm trying my best to match the art style of Andrew's drawing, and I know I'm not going to be able to match it perfectly, but at least I'd like to get as close as I can. I'm still not that great at sculpting heads just yet. It usually takes me 2 or 3 tries before I sculpt one that's good enough to use. I think the one in this video is actually the 3rd head that I sculpted for Bulma. Sometimes it feels like I keep retrying things until I get lucky and it looks good enough. To finish off the head, I modeled some eyebrows, the iris, and lashes so I wouldn't have this creepy blank stare in my face for the rest of the sculpt. But from here I move back to the body blockout and start applying all the modifiers so nothing weird happens when I join it all together. Then I bring it into sculpt mode and remesh. Now it's just a matter of smoothing things out between all of the shapes that we just merged together. I kept the hands separate because a lot of the times when I remesh hands, I have to remesh to a way smaller voxel size to keep the fingers from merging together. Since I don't need all of that resolution on the character, I just limit it to the hands to avoid manually having to cut spaces between the fingers. After shaping the hands a bit, I wanted to do a little more detail work on the butt, crotch, knees, and clavicle, so I remeshed the body to a higher resolution, and for some reason I joined the hand before I did that. Since this was a lower resolution than I had my hands at before, it joined the fingers together, which is what I was trying to avoid earlier. To fix this, I tried the lasso trim brush, which took ages to compute, but didn't work. Then I tried the box trim brush, which usually does work, but it didn't work this time. Eventually, I had to delete the verts in the areas that were melted together, then filling the faces, then smoothing it over. Really trashy topology, but you know, who cares? Just throw it through a QuadRemesher and get the quad count down. Then we'll move on to the head. I remeshed the ear, used a mask to push the inner part in, and joined it to the head with a Boolean modifier because if I had remeshed it to the head, I'd have to do a bunch of smoothing afterwards. Ran the head through QuadRemesher, then added a multi-res and applied a shrink wrap, and I started cleaning things up on the face. Next, I dropped in a rigify human and lined up the bones to the body. I really sped through this part. It doesn't have to be perfect. I just needed to be able to move the body into a pose, and I can fix any of the problems later with sculpting. Parent the rig to the body and start posing. Since I flew through the rigging process, her finger controls are all jacked up, but with a little bit of finagling, I got her hand into something that somewhat resembles a fist. I'll worry about it later. After I get the pose that I want, I select the rig and go back into rest position to get the T-pose back. I made a curve shape to serve as the bevel for another curve path, plopped it on her head with a bit of twist to make her side pony, then I started sculpting the hair details. To get her non-ponytailed hair, I added a few loops to a subdivided cube and got it into a bell-shaped, applied the subdivision, and started deleting faces where I didn't want hair. Applied a solidify and started sculpting the hair into place. I wasn't sure how to do her bangs, so I just tried using a plane and added some loop cuts and shaped it to the reference, then deleted faces that wasn't needed. Probably could have used curves. Probably should have used curves. Curves would have been easier. I spent a lot of time wrangling these awfully modeled bangs into place when I could have made a bevel reference and then just moved the curve points instead, but maybe I'll do that next time. Hair in general is a tough fight for me. It seems like every time I make a character's hair, there's some puzzle I'm trying to figure out. Here I joined the two main parts together and resculpted the strands. And when I try to throw it through QuadRemesher, this one section can never get enough geometry. I tried changing the adaptive settings and then doubling the quad count. This one part still kept coming out all janky, but it's another thing that I'm gonna have to worry about later. Now I'm making clothes, and I love making clothes because almost everything you need is already there by this point. All you need to do is select the verts that you want, duplicate and separate them, throw on a solidify, and the rest of the details could be sculpted in with a multi-res modifier or just pulled from even more duplicated verts. The boots, duped verts from the foot. Leg belt, duped verts from the leg. Not leg belt, vooped dirts from the not leg. You get the process. Almost everything you need to dress your character can be pulled from the base mesh. Of course, if it's easier to add new geometry, then do it that way. The easiest way is usually the best way. I dropped in a cylinder to make her button because it would be easier than duplicating the verts that are already there and then trying to shape them into a circular shape. I continued the process of duplicating and sculpting until I had almost everything knocked out. Then I started on her goggles. I added a plane and used a mirror mod so I'd only have to model half of the thing. Added some loops to shape it up, then a subdiv to smooth out the edges. Deleted the interfaces, then extruded it for thickness, used proportional editing to curve it, then added a plane for the glass. After plopping it on her boobs, added a curve, and then wrapped it around her neck to the goggles. Oh yeah, almost forgot about these janky hands. Maybe we can sculpt them into shape. No, that's not working. Maybe I can separate the fingers. That should make editing way easier. I couldn't figure out why it was rotating so weirdly. I tried applying all transforms, using the 3D cursor as the pivot, and even changing the origin point. Later on I figured it out that it was using its origin point from the rest position. So in order to be able to rotate the geometry without it going crazy, I'd have to apply the armature modifier to make the potential pose the actual geometry. But either way, these fingers are stupid and dumb, and I gotta figure something else out. So what I ended up doing was going with curves. They were really way easier to place and pose, and when I got them close enough, I converted them to geometry and finished shaping them in sculpt mode. It's not the perfect solution, and it doesn't look super amazing, but I'm gonna take it. The last thing that I modeled was the last hip belt. I used a curve and subdivided a few more verts in and shaped it around her. When I was happy with the placement, I converted it to geometry and rounded out the ends. Then I duped some of the faces to make the buckle, and then a few more faces to fake the tail of the belt. For the materials, I went into this sculpt wanting this to have a stop motion sculpted clay look. I had originally planned to follow Southern Shotty's tutorial on making the shader, but by the time I got to this part of the sculpt, I had already been working on it for 12 hours over the course of 3 weeks. My day job has really been gobbling up all of my personal time, so instead I picked up Doublegum's Clay Dough shader since it was on sale, and it's got a ton of options and sliders to get you the look that you want. I had to dial back the displacement a bunch since it was exploding the sculpt. It seems like the shader would work a whole lot better on more simpler, less detailed models. I mean, I know this Bulma sculpt isn't the most detailed thing in the world, and it's not that detailed itself, but the shader would lend itself better to even less detailed characters. But anywho, for the face, I first unwrapped the head, then added an AO into a color ramp, plugged my skin colors in there, then sent it to a mix RGB that had an image texture hooked into it with the alpha as the factor. Then I went into texture paint mode and painted the lips and the blush. And that's how I sculpted Bulma in Blender. I know I glossed over a lot of things in this sculpt breakdown, so if you have any questions, just leave a comment and I will try my best to answer them. You can find our lovely references artist on Twitter and Instagram as @AndrewCockroach. I'm on Twitter as @Nasaki and on Instagram as Brand Sculpts. Lastly, I don't have a free blend file for this sculpt up on Gumroad since it contains paid materials. Whenever I get the extra time, I'll strip the mats off and upload the untextured model. But thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next sculpt. Bye!
It's over!